Okay, one last thing here about communication that I want to share that I think is um, pretty important. At least I think maybe this is the last thing. Um, One of the things that I've kind of seen over the years, and this is kind of just experiential knowledge, I guess, that I'm going to try to share with you, is that it seems to me that over time, healthy couples um, tend to move toward each other, and dysfunctional couples tend to move away from each other. I think one of the reasons is that we all try to balance each other out. I think it's kind of like a tug of war. I think that um, we have maybe kind of a tendency to try to balance our relationship so that we don't want to spend too much or be too cheap. We don't want to. Somebody wants to have sex all the time, but somebody else doesn't want to have it at all, and so we pull. Somebody wants to be really easy on our kids. Somebody wants to be really hard on the kids. Somebody wants to plan for the future all the time. Somebody wants to just be kind of freewheeling and do whatever comes next. And I think that because we don't typically marry someone who's a clone, although we do tend to be attracted to people who are similar, we don't marry somebody who's just exactly like us. And we don't want to, because if you do that, you got no synergy. You bring two different people together, you create something that's better, or you can create something that's better than what you are separately. But to do that, it means that we have to figure out how to manage that difference without it turning into something ugly, and how to let it draw us together over time instead of pushing us apart over time. So I use this analogy a lot with couples, and that is a tug of war. That what happens is if you disagree on something, or you have different tendencies or different values about something, we tend to pull against each other because we live in this fear. Well, let's take spending money, for example. That's kind of easy. If we have one person that's more likely to spend and one person that's more likely to save, then we've got an instant conflict. So we got two people pulling on each other. The one who likes to spend is going to pull because they think, if I don't pull that person over to my side, then I'll never be able to spend anything. We'll be miserable because I'll never be able to buy anything that I want. We'll never go on a vacation. We'll never have dates. We'll never do anything. So because I know that person doesn't want me to spend, I continually try to pull them over to my side. Okay? Now, on the other end, there's the person who's really more interested in saving than spending. And they're terrified that if they don't constantly pull, that other person will spend every penny that we have. We'll never save any money. We won't be able to retire. We won't be able to travel. We won't be able to do anything. We won't be able to pay our bills because they'll spend everything. So I've got to pull as hard as I can in my direction so that they don't spend every penny that we have. Well, then what we have is we have two people who are pulling as hard as they can against each other because they're scared that if they let up, everything will go straight in the toilet. Okay? We'll either spend every penny we have and be destitute, or we'll never spend a penny and we'll be miserable. Well, it's not weird or abnormal or dysfunctional to have that situation. What becomes dysfunctional is if we do that year after year after year after year after year, because what happens if we continue with that is that we just get farther and farther and farther and farther apart. And all of a sudden, we've been together for 10 years and we disagree more than we ever have. And we not only disagree, we feel that distance between us. We don't relate to that person as well anymore. And if we stay together for 20 years, sometimes we think we got nothing in common. We don't share anything. Okay? That's what dysfunctional people do over time. They become less like each other. They become less connected because they keep polarizing. Healthy couples, on the other hand, figure out that they have to move toward each other. And the way that they do that is by letting up on the rope a little bit. Let's go back to the same analogy. If we have that person who spends all of our money, and they are pulling and pulling and pulling, and I'm trying to save. Well, what I have to do is I have to ease up on the rope and step toward them a little bit. So maybe a situation comes up and the spender says, you know what I'd really like? I'd really like it if we could take a weekend and just go somewhere, just me and you. Well, if I'm the saver, then my typical response might be, we can't afford that. We can't afford to do that. How are we going to pay for that? So we see the tug of war. But if I want us to be healthy and to grow closer to each other, maybe what I say is, when I hear that, I say, okay, my immediate response is to say, no, we can't do that. But I'm going to say, I think that would be a lot of fun. Why don't we figure out if we can do that and still maybe not spend too much money, but I really want to do it. Well, all of a sudden, the saver has taken a tiny step toward the middle. Okay? Now, what that does is it takes the tension off the rope. If the spender keeps pulling, and they might, but they usually don't. If the spender keeps pulling, then the spender would go, oh my gosh, they said we could go on this trip. And they go out and they start buying new clothes and renting a car and buying plane tickets to Hawaii for a weekend. Well, that typically is not going to happen. Usually what's going to happen is if the saver says, you know what, I really want to do that too. Let's figure out how to do it, but just be kind of thrifty with it. Then maybe the spender goes, wow, they want to go. And so maybe the spender then says, well, you know what? I bet we could do it and be really cheap. And all of a sudden, both of them have taken a short step toward the middle. Okay? Now, they're going to continue to have the tug of war over time. But what happens is, if they do that over time, they take little steps toward the middle. Then what happens is 10 years down the road, instead of being more and more polarized, 10 years down the road, we have two people who are closer together than they were before. And we have a person who's a spender who has learned to be cheap and learned to save. And we have a person who's a saver who has learned that there's some joy in spending money on things that are important to you. And it's kind of healthy to sometimes do that for each other. One of the ways couples can do this, and I challenge people in therapy sometimes, is to say, I want you to tell me what it is about your partner that you need to learn to be like. And I want you, this other person, to tell me what is it about your partner over here that you need to learn. You need to be more like him. You need to be more like her. Tell me how. And make them figure out what it is about their partner that they really need to learn to do. Sometimes people can figure that out, and it's really healthy for them, and it helps them take a step.